Jar Oil. The company have filling stations across the country, and our rates are relatively cheaper than anyone else across the country. Jar Oil is the biggest producer and distributor of cement in the country with the most competitive prices in the market.
If you're an entrepreneur and your business is not yet registered, if you're looking to grow your registered business, or you're an accomplished professional, our Elevate program supports you with access to finance, access to markets, access to capacity building. Sign up now or refer a friend at ecobank.com/elevate. Elevate by EcoBank. A better way, a better Africa.
Santa yàlla.
looy xaar utal Wave nga scan nga fay te nag doo ci yokku dara.
We talk about corruption every day, but for many Gambians, politics comes down to a simple question. Yeah. Can I afford it? Food,
I agree.
Transport, electricity, water. What's Unite Economic proposition for the ordinary... Sorry, Coalition 2026's
yes.
proposition for the ordinary Gambian?
When you said that, it reminded me of a post that I made on social media some time ago. I said fighting corruption is a luxury, and you don't really understand it until you are faced with challenges. Now, we are very privileged to even talk about fighting corruption. Now, for the average Gambian, the thought is, how do I survive? Yeah. So, and to them, unfortunately, all of us are the same because they've been disappointed by the system on multiple occasions. They've lost faith. And when you said, these things, I'll like to borrow something from, I don't remember who said this, but it said that there are 3 C's that continue to harm, challenge the Gambia's progress. He said cost of living, crime, and also corruption. So, for example, cost of living, what we have said is that we want to divide our development agenda into 3 phases: short-term, medium-term, and long-term. So the long-term is setting up the system that will make sure that these things are sustainable. But first of all, we feel that it makes no sense that up till today, we continue to face challenges of feeding ourselves. Now, can this be done in 100 days? It's something we need to look into. But, for example, we need to be able to have laws and legislations once we have a new government that can protect the rights and aspirations and wishes of the Gambian people and the common man in general. Secondly, we want to look into contracts, for example, that have been awarded by the government to make sure that most of these contracts are awarded in the right way and to make sure that they went through the right process. We want to also make sure that at least the cost of living comes down. Now, people would ask, how would you do this in a short term?
Exactly.
Yes. For example...
It's not just the what, but how.
Yeah, how. Yeah. For example, you look at, varieties like Narika. They take 6 to 8 weeks to mature. Mm-hmm. It makes no sense that in Gambia, we have had this variety that was introduced to us almost 2 decades ago, and we have let it die out without keeping hold of it. If you're able to farm Narika in less than 2 months, you can harvest and you can package and you can put into the market. Tell me why, for example, we cannot, as a country, invest in rice production at a large scale. Tell me why, as a country, we cannot fish in our own waters through trawlers, but let foreign vessels come into our waters and fish large scale. Tell me why, for example, nobody's saying control prices directly, but tell me how the market cannot be influenced by making sure that we inject resources into it to make sure that now we are letting Gambians have more money in their pockets. These are all ways that we feel we will be able to at least control the cost of living to some extent, subsidizing, for example. But most of all, what we are looking at in the long term is not is to, one, diversify the economy and not focus on taxes, for example. Two, also make sure that we increase the number of people that pay tax and not increase tax. I think that is one thing that Gambians have, because every day or every month there's a news article out saying that tax is going to be increased by so and so percent, or a new tax levy is introduced. What this is doing is that it is trying to cover gaps, but it's just putting a band-aid on an open wound. It is not really curing the problem that we are facing. What the government needs to do is, how do you diversify the economy? Not just focus on taxes, for example, but have other ventures that gives resources to the country. Now, when, for example, we are always celebrating that GRA is hitting its targets,
and we always do.
Yeah, it means that people are being squeezed out more. It doesn't mean that a job is being done. It just means that you, as a common Gambia, is giving more to the country than you are supposed to. But why is that happening? Because we don't have any industries in the country. Even the tourism industry we used to boast about today is not in any way doing as well as it used to. For example, when you also hear people say that the economy has grown by so and so percent, but who is controlling the economy in the country? The economy isn't being controlled by Gambians. So any growth that really takes
So
place.
what will your coalition do if elected to change that situation?
Support young businessmen and women in the Gambia. Make sure that indigenous.
Support them how? By giving them capital to.
Yes, we have already started that at KMC. We came up with the 100 million women's fund, where we supported market women and made sure that we also gave them seed funding. We also had a 20 million youth grant, where youth entrepreneurs also benefited from, especially during COVID. There's ample evidence to prove this and to show that indeed it has had impact in the market within the Cardiff Municipal Council. We also want to see how best do we venture into especially agriculture and support agro businesses. I think it's one of the ways that we can tackle a lot of challenges that we're facing as a country. I've said that if we can handle and manage our food resource and our food origin, we will be also able to tackle at least 50% of our health issues. Now, how do you do this? Is by injecting capital into agriculture, making sure that they're trained, and not just training on best farming practices, but even on financial literacy. Because you realize that a lot of people are successful in business, but because they don't have financial literacy, it comes back to haunt them and their businesses are not sustainable. That is one way we can do things. Two, for the medium and long term, is how do we revise the curriculum, the education curriculum, and make sure that science and technology and TVET is also impacted from high school, not just at the university level, but at least people need to have a foundation before they get into the tertiary, position. Okay. Unfortunately, in Gambia, people get into TVET because they have not done well in school. That cannot be the way. All over the world, evolved because of TVET and skills and technology.
We'll talk about young people, hopefully before we end this conversation. But central to, most, if not all of these, development approaches that you have in mind would be, electricity.
Yes,
and
energy.
we face challenges these past days. And even the World Bank acknowledges that, the tariff in the Gambia is high.
Absolutely high.
So what is the coalition's credible plan, not just in statements of intent, we've had enough of this, credible plan for making electricity more reliable and affordable without simply promising more subsidies?
Yeah. So, Uncle Peter, we have done our homework. In fact, we have had the past 2-3 weeks, personally, I have been engaging people in the energy sector. And what I've realized is that Gambia doesn't have a problem of producing energy.
We don't?
No, but the grid is the problem. The grid is not able to distribute it as we would want to distribute it. But when you talk about the tariff, I think why it's very high is because we have only one producer.
Well, first, let's talk about capacity first, because we understand that capacity has dropped even further.
Yes.
And in the meantime, demand has surged.
Yes. So what happens is that according to, because this is a technical position, right? So according to information I was fed, is that the grid is what Gambia has an issue with. So we're producing energy, we're getting energy from other sources. So we have enough energy, but the grid is not able. I think this is why the president even said we can even sell the energy we have, for example. At some point he said that. I think it's the understanding that we are producing enough, or we have enough.
What we were going to sell,
yes, now we need it.
We would have bought from other sources.
You know,
I'm talking about, local capacity.
Yeah.
Because we have to see, energy as a national security issue.
It is a national security concern. Yeah. So that is what I'm saying. So the grid is not able to support, the population today. Grid expansion is something that we need to do. That's one. But two, I think what NAWEC needs to do is that NAWEC needs to move away from.
Now, I'm asking what Coalition 2026.
Yes. So this is what we are going to do
about this problem.
Yes. Right. So this is what we are going to do is to make sure that NAWEC moves away from being a producer into a distributor and also a regulator. Okay. This is what NAWEC needs to do. Thirdly, when we say we need to privatize energy, it's not saying that we need to let private companies distribute, but private companies can produce energy. What that does is that it brings competition, and NAWEC can buy at a cheaper rate and not at a higher rate. This is where the tariffs come in place. What Coalition 2026 is saying is that we will open the energy sector into privatization, make sure that energy is produced privately. When energy is produced privately, NAWEC buys this energy because people will be forced to sell the energy they produce because NAWEC by law is the only one that has to distribute it. So if you distribute it as a private sector, you are breaking the law. Now, if NAWEC buys it from these producers at a good tariff, NAWEC can later redistribute and make sure that the grid is expanded, that it can bank all of us. Now, this is, for example, where we're having a problem today, the tariffs, because like I mentioned, levies keep getting added on the taxpayer because the taxpayer doesn't have a choice. Now, what Coalition 2026 is saying that once you have a grid expansion, two, you are able to produce energy. NAWEC is a regulator. It makes it easier. For example, we can use the internet as an example. Now, because we have multiple internet producers, internet tariffs have gone down to some extent. No, so in fact, we were able to force them to have a ceiling. So these are things that we are saying that can happen if energy is also produced privately and distributed by NAWEC. So Coalition 2026 is open to privatization of the energy sector. We believe it will be a way of making sure that energy is more affordable and energy is accessible to the Gambian people. Thirdly, we also do understand that we have sub-regional treaties that we have signed. These are all going to be considered, but in as much as we want to align with what international partners are saying, what is most important to Coalition 2026 is to make sure that the Gambian people and the consumers are getting worth for their money. And also what is sad is that now it has become a new normal. And this is why I'd like to sometimes say that being a head of state in the Gambia is so easy because people naturally accustom themselves to the hardships that they're facing. Now people make jokes about NAWEC, not getting light. Even myself, sometimes it happens to me. Today I'm like, no, I don't think we're going to have light today. I think our turn is tomorrow. But we need to demand, for these services. We're paying for it. This is why we have cash power systems. It's a prepaid.
You give them your money before they give the service.
Yeah, huh? So it's not postpaid. It's prepaid. So once you pay for it, it should be available. So
So let's come to young people, Martin, Aji in the studio here. What's your answer to somebody who comes to you and say, I have all the qualifications, but I still can't find a job? Now, don't just, give me the usual thing. Oh, yeah, that's why we are, we will come up with TVET initiatives. And, this is somebody who's gone through,
all TVET, the trainings.
TVET and more. They have their qualifications, but they still can't find a job.
I think this is why there was a time that I was in Brikama and I met a young man who was an electrician. He said he went to GTTI and out of their class of almost 40 people, he is the only one gainfully employed. I think that tells you the issue. TVET is not the problem. People are gaining skills in Gambia, even if it's not through formalized ways, because we have always had the apprenticeship system in the Gambia. So the skills acquisition is not a problem, but where you implement the skills and the market for the skill is what has been a problem. Now, Gambia has like I keep saying, we are set up in a way that we have a lot of opportunities, but we are not harnessing these opportunities. Now, when you look at the labor force of the Gambia and you look at the productivity level, I think it shows where the issue actually is. But what we also need to do is that we need to build dignity in labor. And that has been an issue in the Gambian context. People are so used to getting things, the easiest of ways, even if it's not in the most honorable way, because I don't want to use the word illegal. But what that has done is that it has placed a lot of pressure on the younger generation, and they feel that they need to do the same thing. But there's actually dignity in labor, and Unite, or the Coalition 2026 government, is willing to open and give opportunities to young people. This is why we have said that at least 60% of contracts given to government contracts need to be given to young Gambians. So I've spoken to a lot of, because within Unite, and when we were building Unite, we had consultations that we built, especially when we were building the coalition. The manifesto. So we had discussions with groups. So I met the construction construction association, and I asked them, why is it that you don't build roads in Gambia, or Gambians don't build roads? And one of them told me, to build a road in Gambia, you need to have a certification that you have completed a project of that magnitude, because it's a heavy, it's a major project, and it cannot be given to anybody. I told him, which I do understand, but are you given the opportunity to do that? He said no. So I asked him, so when is the cycle going to end that you have, you cannot show the certification? Because if you are not given the opportunity, you cannot have the certification to show that indeed I am capable of completing this. So this is where I also feel that we need to give opportunity to young Gambians who have the technical know-how, who have the assessment. Gambia continues to lose its best of the best to the outside world. Now, we are proud of that because they are making a lot of name for themselves out there, but Gambia needs it more. So capital flight, be it brain drain, are things that are not only tied to neocolonialism, or they're still tied to it because we are still in the neocolonial era. So until we are able to decolonize and give opportunities to our young people in the context of Gambia, these are challenges that we are going to face. And the Coalition 2026 government is willing and is ready to work with our demography, which is the young people in this country, and give them an opportunity to serve their country by making sure that government contracts, they are prioritized when it comes to government contracts, making sure that the opportunities are there for them, opening up the markets for them, and making sure that we are also able to build B2B, which is business-to-business opportunities, especially with corporates around the world, to make sure that they have opportunities. Another point that we also want to do is to link the diaspora with the young entrepreneurs in this country. There are a lot of Gambians in the diaspora who have the capital, want to invest back home, but because one or two reasons, or unpleasant reasons and experiences, they haven't been able to do so or find worthy individuals. We want to have a directorate either at GAIPA or at the Gambia Chamber of Commerce, which will be able to help Gambians in the diaspora find a channel that will help them invest back home, bring in capital that they have worked on, link them with young entrepreneurs who are doing incredibly well, so that it becomes a win-win situation. While as it's difficult for government to provide opportunities and let's say seed funding for scaling up for SMEs, what we do is that we provide leverage for them, and investors, Gambian investors, and even in the diaspora, because now it's an era where a lot of diasporians are finding home in West Africa. Ghana was able to do it, we can also do it, and Ghana was able to raise a lot of funds from it. Absolutely. So these are opportunities that we are also looking at.
Absolutely. Earlier on in this conversation, you raised the fact that the Gambian economy is not actually controlled, by Gambians.
Yes.
Some of the key players, are not Gambians. And then you just brought up there the issue of diaspora Gambians. The country receives substantial support from development partners and relies heavily on remittances, as I'm sure you know from Gambians abroad. How would a coalition 2026 or Unite government make the economy less dependent on aid, remittances, and consumption, and more capable of generating productive jobs and domestic wealth?
That was what I started with, actually. I said diversification of the economy, that we look at diversifying the economy and not just base it on remittance. And for example, I was on another program during the weekend, and the guy said, yeah, but the government has said that the GDP has grown. I said, yes, GDP has grown, but to
it's
what?
not just government. The IMF tells
Yes.
us that, and all these other.
Yes,
you know,
but then to what extent? So now, for example, because I believe the growth of the GDP, especially based on the remittance we have received. Now, I'm not an expert when it comes to economics, but it's just common sense that if people who are back home are asking you to send more money, it means we're going to have more remittances coming in. And if you say that the GDP has grown to some extent, and you say 48 to 50% of the GDP is based on remittance, I think it answers the question of where the funds are coming from. But we have also said that, like you have mentioned, that you don't increase tax, but you increase the number of people that pay tax.
Broaden the tax base.
Yes.
As your party leader said here.
Yes. You have to broaden the tax base, make more people, employ more people, create opportunities for them. You look at the industries, for example. What industry do we have in the Gambia? How do we make sure that our young people are being gainfully employed? These are issues that we need to focus on if we want to diversify the economy.
So what will a Coalition 2026 government do to start the issue of manufacturing in the country?
First, it's to make it easy for companies to be registered in the Gambia, because we have understood that a lot of bureaucracy goes into registering companies in the Gambia, especially international corporations. Two is to make sure that there are laws that also protect the consumer and also the labor force. Because in as much as we want to make sure that opportunities are created for our young people, but we cannot also let them be exploited by employers. Thirdly is also making sure that we make the process seamless, and even offer tax breaks. Because when you offer tax break to a big player or even a small player, what happens is that you are giving them opportunity to grow. When they grow, they employ more people, resources are being built, and what we need to consider is that when facilities are built by that corporation, the facilities are left in the country. Another point is also to make sure that these companies coming in have Gambian partners that they're working with. That just makes it easier, but also most important, like I mentioned, how do we also empower the indigenous industries, for example? You look at the fishing sector, these are cultural industries, not just indigenous in a way, but there are people with knowledge that they have inherited on how, for example, the seasons work, how the fishes are protected for, how the marine life is looked after. You look at agriculture and animal husbandry. This is also a cultural thing for a certain culture in the country. The nomads. You look at the ranching system, for example. In Gambia, we used to produce cheese. We used to produce pastoralized milk. Today we don't. And it is not that. And when you go around the world, they tell you about the Ndama cattle and how the quality of meat. Our quality of meat, but we cannot even boast of it. Yeah. So I went to Japan, for example, and I was charged in a restaurant. I was told farmed beef costs cheaper and free range costs so much. I told them where I come from, all animals are free range. Yeah. And this is something that people pay a premium for. And we have it for free in this country, and we are not taking advantage of it.
So your government will encourage activity in those areas?
Yes, agriculture, fisheries, and general, yeah.
Okay, and just finally, if Unite were to win the presidency in December, what would you want Gambians to be able to point to 5 years later and say, this is the thing that changed under Coalition 2026, or whether it's Unite?
What we will want the Gambian people to remember us for will be that the government that changed their lives, the government that brought dignity, the government that brought prosperity, and the government that brought change to the doorstep of the Gambian people. 5 years from now, when we look back in 2031, we want to be happy to say that we have been able to provide employment for our young people. We have been able to reduce the number of backway goers. We have been able to provide an environment where Gambian businesses have been able to flourish. We have been also been able to secure our country. Today, for example, you talk about El Salvador and Nabil Bukele. People talk about his ways of doing things, but he has been able to secure his country. And these are things that we are willing to do, and to see how best do we secure, our Gambians. Every single day there's news going around that someone has either been killed or there's a homicide case that people are looking at. These are worrisome, realities that we are faced with. 5 years from now, we want Gambians to say, num bon, time me Talib Ahmed Ben Souda. Ken do dan join dañu touch suma bitik wala dañu rey ñet. Those are things that we will be proud of, and those are things I believe Gambians will be proud of, to look back on. But more so prosperity, goodwill, ambition, and we want to lead by example, to the young Gambians, to say that if we were audacious, if we were ambitious, and if we were brave enough to take the lead, in all sectors, young Gambians can also do the same thing and succeed.
Kemo, thank you very much for your time this morning.
It's a pleasure. Thank
Kemo Bojang, spokesman of Unite. And are you also spokesman for coalition?
No. Hassan Martin is spokesperson.
Yeah, right.
Jar Oil. The company have filling stations across the country, and our rates are relatively cheaper than anyone else across the country. Jar Oil is the biggest producer and distributor of cement in the country with the most competitive prices in the market.
If you're an entrepreneur and your business is not yet registered, if you're looking to grow your registered business, or you're an accomplished professional, our Elevate program supports you with access to finance, access to markets, access to capacity building. Sign up now or refer a friend at ecobank.com/elevate. Elevate by EcoBank. A better way, a better Africa.
Vive la fe. Sant Yàlla. looy xaar utal Wave nga scan nga fay te nag doo ci yokku dara.
No problem, 0% no charges. Con yo vale como idem. Scan to pay.